I should actually ask some of the questions that are being asked here. So I actually asked this to you earlier before we started, but Timu, who I assume is Finnish, asks, what's the story of edges between Graf's, Paul Erdos, and God?
Okay, right. So every edge here, Erdos is connected to God because he was a skeptic. He sort of famously gave a talk at Notre Dame and said the campus was very nice, but there were too many plus signs. That was kind of a indication of his style. So he certainly was not religious, but he talked about God a lot, who he called the supreme fascist, but in a sort of admiring way. He thought that every theorem had a true proof, which God knew, and kept in something called the book. So when he really wanted to compliment someone on a piece of mathematical work that he had done, he said, your proof's in the book, and that was God's book. And that view is actually not that I mean, usually expressed like less saltily, but like that kind of view that sort of like, well, somebody has to know the right way to prove everything and what's true or what's false. It's actually sort of surprisingly common among people in mathematics. But you know, at the same time, there's also people like Hilda Hudson who's connected to God because she was like extremely devout and she saw the relationship in a totally different way. She has a wonderful essay about this, which I quote in the book, where she says, you know, the truths of mathematics are not the most important of God's thoughts, but they're the only ones we can precisely know. So in her view, that was sort of, doing mathematics was like part of her religious practice, actually, as she saw it and wrote quite movingly about. So graphs are something I write a lot about in the book, and you're actually looking at one as we speak. So a graph in kind of common parlance is sort of like, you know, sort of a picture of some function, y equals f of x or something like that, as we might have done in school. A graph in sort of modern mathematical parlance is a set of things which are connected by edges, just like what you see. So this is a graph, one of whose points is the word graphs. That word comes to us from James Sylvester, this kind of like fascinating character, also very salty like Ross, who sort of went back and forth between Britain and America. And for a British audience, he has a lot of very choice quotes about British math education, like many of which I include in the book, because he was a very spirited writer with a lot of very strong opinions. The frozen formality of British mathematical education is what he complained about. Anyway, he invented the word graphs for this.
So I think it was David in the chat was asking, has anyone used the GPT model with Shakespeare? I've actually found an example of it online, but I don't know if you wanted to comment on sort of training it on sort of classical authors or other things.
I'm sure someone has. I have not seen it done. I've played around with it a little bit for some poetry. I did it with like some John Ashbery.
So I've actually got an example of it here where they...
Yeah, tell us. I'll bet you wouldn't mistake it for Shakespeare exactly, but it'll have some features. So tell us what you get.
So this person has put in Sonnet 18, shall I compare thee to a summer's day? And it goes, blah, 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 blah. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of men. Summer's lease hath all too short a date. And then this is what the GPT has said. And it goes, a winter's day when beams of sun are few, and skies are grey with clouds intemperate, is to thy beauty somehow sordid grown. Her lovely, lovely eye is quite shut up, like pale windows pale before a sunny shower. I mean, it sounds quite like Shakespeare, I'll be honest with you. That's pretty Shakespearean.
That's actually a better reproduction of Scansion than you usually see, so I'm rather impressed by that. But by the way, and something I write about in the book that I want to just tell the audience as a kind of safety thing, if you see a demo that somebody made, they probably tried it 100 times and showed you the best one. This is why I say it's like really, and a lot of people who work on stuff like this are very nice about giving people access to it so you can play with it yourself. And you got to do that, because if you look at a demo, it's impressive. You might be looking at the best example out of 100 or 1,000 times they tried it, and that can give a misleading impression of how impressive. Having played with it myself, I would say that I rarely see it capture the meter that well, and I wouldn't be surprised if 99 other times it didn't capture it that well.
And the other thing I was going to ask, am I right in thinking that now when I'm typing on my phone, I get a list of suggested words at the top that I might be typing? And I assume that's all done via Markov chains as well, that it just looks at what I've been writing previously and can then work out when I'm saying all the at the end of something, it's probably like, oh, best, you're saying best, and then just saying Martin. and then you'll say maybe put in an X, and then you're sending it. So it kind of knows what I'm doing. That's all Markov chains, right? It must be the same thing.
It's learning a Markov chain. It's learning to sort of produce artificial text. And there's always really interesting questions. How much should it use the entire corpus of everyone's text messages versus how much should it more heavily weight your particular text messages, which is a lot less data. It doesn't want to only use those because it's not enough data for it to learn, but it also ideally is sort of using the kind of things that you personally are likely to say, and not a completely generic user of a text messaging system. So I don't know about you, Martin, but I mean, I have my Gmail does that, and I will never accept the word, whatever it suggests. If that's what I was going to say, I try to choose something else to say because I'm not going to let the machine beat me. And if there's no choice, if I'm like, really, I have to say that thing and predicted, I will type it myself rather than accept that Google. So maybe I'm just being spiteful, but that's my attitude about that.
I mean, I for one just accept whatever it says and welcome our new robot overlords.
You'll do better in the post-apocalyptic machine-ruled wasteland than I will, I'm sure. My insolence will be punished.
There's actually a load of really great chat going on in the text chat. So do keep commenting and talking. A lot of the questions that have come up though are kind of around maths education and kind of your view of. So one person was saying. That they were really bad at maths, and it's obviously a little bit of publicity for you as well. And then, so Oliver says, just want to say they use a naughty word, but I'm going to say bad at maths. And then I read Jordan's last book, and then I was interested and tried a bit more. Now I'm going to uni in September to study maths as a minor. So thanks for the books, Jordan. But later on, they asked, what would you say to someone who's kind of just joining maths at university for the first time and is feeling a bit intimidated? Because I know maths can be the subject where you do get some incredibly clever and brilliant people that might be on your course, and it can be quite intimidating if you're just like maths and are quite good at it but aren't a sort of super genius.
It's true, but there's something, I mean, but that's true of everything, and I don't really, there's sort of some kind of psychological nugget that I don't understand for why people respond that way, particularly in math. Because look, we were just talking about Shakespeare. Okay, let's say you go to uni to study poetry. You're going to suck compared to Shakespeare probably, right? Like there's also somebody, that person happens to be dead, but there's even probably somebody better at you than poetry in the university. And yet people don't say like, well, why should I do it? I'm not Shakespeare. In math, I think part of it, I actually just wrote, if people want to look, I just wrote a piece in the Washington Post, at the US newspaper, about some of my thoughts about math education, some of which are taken from the book. I think part of it coming from when I was starting out in teaching, something that came very natural for me was to try to be encouraging to the students to be like, okay, now this is actually quite simple. Like this is easy. Like, let's do this. I thought I was being encouraging. I wasn't being encouraging because in fact, math is pretty hard. Like, in fact, these ideas that are quite deep, it took humanity a long time to work them out. That's one great thing for me, like writing these books and learning about the history, things that I take for granted. I'm like, oh yeah, actually, when people didn't know this, they were really confused about it. Like extremely smart people, the greatest scientists of the day, were confused about things like negative numbers and fractions that we take like completely for granted. Why? Because those are actually hard concepts. And so a child in school, I sort of advocate for sort of like saying like, yeah, we're doing like deep, hard stuff. Like, don't say it's easy when it's not, because if you say it's easy and it's not easy for you, the student, you're going to be like, well, I must be stupid, right? I must be dumb. I must be the problem. And I think, so I think that's one reason that people find it so intimidating. That and the fact that, and which is related, that, you can give an objectively wrong answer in math, and it's unpleasant to be told that you're wrong. Nobody likes it. And it's something that perhaps is less likely to happen in some of your other classes. Although it can. I mean, I remember very vividly in my English class, there was like a pop quiz, and I hadn't finished the novel. It was, I think it was Oliver Twist. We had a pop quiz where we had to sort of write our reaction to the end of the book, and then like the teacher read mine out loud to the class because I had guessed so hilariously wrong like how the book ended. So I guess it is possible to sort of be objectively wrong in a literature class. But So what's the solution to that? The solution, I think, is not to sort of cast aside the notion that there are right or wrong answers in math, since there are. It's to try to develop a classroom where there's just like lower stakes, where like we understand that if you say something that's wrong, that's because you're actually trying to learn something that's difficult. And if you don't understand something and ask a question, it's not because you're bad at the subject, it's because you're there to actually learn something. I'm not saying that's easy, but I think as teachers, that's what we should aspire to, like a classroom where you can just, a kid can just say something totally wrong and everybody's like, that's awesome. Like you took a real swing, like you went for it. You know what I mean? That's what we want.
And there's a related thing that's been coming up as well. I can't remember who made this point, so apologies to whoever it was who said this. But it does seem that having the right teacher seems to be more important for mathematics than it does for English or other subjects. And if you have a really good teacher when you're 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, that can really inspire you. And other people in the chat have been saying, actually, I hated maths at school, and it's, reading fantastic books by the likes of Jordan Ellenberg that have sort of turned me on to what an interesting subject it is. So yeah, do you think there's something specific about math? I mean, and maybe because you don't quite encounter it as much as people read books for fun, but they don't tend to solve theorems for fun. Is that kind of it, or do you think it's just sort of the same as other subjects, and any subject would benefit from having a brilliant teacher?
It's a great question. I think in my own life, I can certainly point that, certainly like the fact that my main job is being a mathematician and somehow now I'm a writer, I can certainly speak to like super inspiring teachers of English and literature and creative writing who kind of made me believe that that could be something that could be built into my life, even if it wasn't my job. So I would say that certainly for me, I had like very inspiring teachers in those literary domains. But again, you might be right. You might be right, because if people are preconditioned for societal reasons to think that a subject is going to be a chore, is going to be unpleasant, you go in with a chip on your shoulder, you go in primed not to like it, then that is probably all the more important for the teacher to be good. And but of course, what does good mean? It can mean a lot of different things. I really don't believe there's like one kind of good math teacher. It could be somebody who's like really, really clear. That's one kind of greatness in teaching. It could be somebody who has a true enthusiasm for the subject, and that enthusiasm shows through in what they do, so that the students in the room feel like, wow, I can like empathically feel how much this person cares about this, and that makes me care about it too, which is a normal human reaction. It could be somebody who's just like really, really well versed in like the important applications of math and sort of emphasizes again and again sort of like how important it is for other things that the students already care about. I mean, there's lots of ways to be good, lots of ways to be bad.
I mean, I also wonder if maths just better when it's taught somehow, that because it's slightly abstract on the page, you've got these symbols and odd things, you can't really work out what it is, whereas sort of English or history or other things are kind of much more human readable. You just sort of read it and understand what's going on. I don't know whether that's maybe part of it as well.
I think I think it's an interesting question. I think one thing that we've wrestled with in the math community is that in principle, right, we're like, wow, okay, we live in the world of the internet where people can have the sort of like the sort of mathematical knowledge of thousands of years at their fingertips. Why are there not more mathematicians who are completely self-trained, who just kind of like watched seminars on YouTube and sort of like read books and like picked it all up? For whatever reason, we have not yet figured out a way to generate new mathematicians, except in the old-fashioned way of like one-on-one long-term training. So it's just as you say, for some reason that seems to still be necessary, or at least we haven't figured out another way to do it yet.
There's actually been a bit of chat in the text about the golden mean, which is sort of about this idea of how certain mathematical concepts, like the golden ratio, which you wrote the brilliant thing in Slate, and it's also and it's also on your chart as well. It's interesting how things that's in maths that seem kind of magical and keep cropping up in places also kind of lend themselves to mysticism and people kind of pontificating about some kind of bigger, maybe supernatural significance to some of these numbers. I just wondered if you'd like to speak a bit about the golden ratio and sort of what you've written about it and how it kind of keeps cropping up in different places.
Yeah, because it's something I read about in the book, and if you want to kind of see that part of it, sort of taste before you buy, I have an article in Slate that's like largely excerpted from that part of the book. So if you look at my article, The Most Irrational Number, if somebody wants to put a link in the chat, they can. That's an excerpt from the book. And you're absolutely right, because the golden ratio, sometimes called phi, that's the Greek letter that I've used there in that box, is on the one hand an object of real mathematical interest and has been since Euclid's time. Kepler sort of called it like a jewel, like a jewel of mathematics. But also, people are like weirdly mystical about it. There was like a sort of, if you have what's called a Bloomberg terminal. I don't know if this exists in the UK or if it's a US only thing.
They do exist in the UK, but I'm not sure if people would know what they are if they don't work in finance. So go ahead.
There's people who to this day follow what's called the Elliott wave theory, which was a sort of like weird theory worked out by sort of a guy who was sort of a invalid and was sort of sitting at home a lot in the 1930s, where he believed that like all of the stock market cycles, he was sort of the anti-Bachelier. Bachelier was like, maybe there's just no pattern, it's just random. Elliott was like, no, everything in nature has a mystical pattern. Like there's like waves, the top waves, and there's like really fast ones, and there's like big ones that take like hundreds of years to complete, and they're all related to each other by multiples of the golden ratio. And people are still into this, and you can still see people saying like, well, the golden ratio predicts the stock market is about to go down, and then it doesn't happen, and then they're like, oh, I meant the square of the golden ratio, I guess that's what it was this time, like, et cetera, et cetera. It's very, very, it's very, very popular. There was like it got worse after the Da Vinci Code came out, because there was this this hugely popular novel that I think was like very rife with golden ratio mysticism. After that, there was like a golden ratio diet where you were supposed to like eat 1.618 repeat, et cetera, times as much carbohydrates as protein or something like this. Why this is, I suppose it's because mathematics carries with it a certain cultural prestige. It's thought of as something, correctly, it's thought of as something profound. Correctly, and so if you can a technical outfit on sort of piece of mysticism promote, it sort of maybe looks a little bit more profound than it really is, and that's very appealing to purveyors of mysticism.
One thing that I was going to ask you about, because we've just got a few minutes left, is the front cover of your book is a lovely Dorito chip with the corner missing, and I noticed you've got triangles on your little diagram there. We haven't covered the significance of either triangles or Doritos in this book. I just wonder if you could mention why you chose that image for the cover and what's the significance.
So just to sort of like, peel back the curtain a little bit for the watchers about how book publishing works. I didn't choose that image, and I don't know how it was chosen, and it's different from the American image, which I also didn't choose. So it's pretty interesting. The way this works is that book covers are made by designers, and depending on how differential the press wants to be for you, they might just tell you what it is, or they might sort of give you a few options and tell you you're welcome to weigh in on which ones you like better. But the author definitely does not get to pick. And so I would actually love to know, if people are chattering about this, the American cover has a tree, and I know why it's a tree, because I write a lot about the geometric concept of a tree in the book. I don't actually know why it's a Dorito on the British cover, and I sort of had been wondering whether it's sort of like a British cultural reference that I don't quite get. I get that it's a triangle, and of course, I write about triangles in the beginning of the book because in some sense that's what we think of. We start by thinking of, if we sort of remember geometry a bit from high school, we're like, oh right, there's some business about triangles and them being isosceles or something like that, and their angles. And so the Dorito picture is clearly referencing that, but why is it a Dorito? That I actually don't understand. I'm going to leave it as a mystery.
Oh, so that was the one thing I was going to say. When we were talking about sort of maths education and how maths is taught and what it's like to do maths at university, I guess I would say, do you have any advice for someone who's who's maybe 10, 11, kind of a bit into maths, kind of thinking, well, should I go off and study maths at university? Which there's anything particular area of maths you think they should focus on? Is there any particular? Obviously, you're going to say number theory, I guess. But what would you give advice to a young person who's sort of interested in getting into maths and becoming a professional mathematician?
So first of all, I think I would just be encouraging because, of course, I'm a booster. But I think, first of all, I think being a mathematician is like a truly like wonderful way of life where you get to sort of like think about sort of some of the deepest and most interesting things like for a living. But the good thing about it is that most people who train in mathematics don't become mathematicians, and it's like a very door opening thing to study. So, at the University of Wisconsin, we have hundreds and hundreds of math majors. The set of those who go on to become mathematicians is very small, and it's not because they're less capable. It's because by studying math, I mean, being a mathematician is not something that most people want to be. Like, most people don't want to spend their whole life just doing mathematics. For a few people, it is like this passion, and they do find that's what they want. But many people want to do something that involves mathematics, and sort of studying mathematics sets you up for that. So I think the main thing I would say is don't feel like you should choose to study mathematics only if the job you want is mathematician. Quite the opposite. I think that for people who want to work in tech, for people who want to work in the business world or in the financial world, for people who want to go on to graduate study in things like economics or the physical sciences, I think for all those things, actually, like a sort of college training in math is as good or better than a subject that some might mistakenly see as more practical. I mean, I once talked to I talked to the people who hire at some of these financial companies, and one fellow once told me, if somebody comes here and they know nothing about finance or economics or business, I can teach them that in 2 weeks. If they come here and they don't know math, like, that's 6 months.
Yeah. I think that's probably what I would say is just do as much maths and variety of different, statistics, applied maths, whatever as you can, because it just gives you such a grounding. It sort of just gives you a toolbox to then do whatever you want. You can go into all kinds of areas, from engineering to, working for an insurance company to, all kinds of different stuff. I did hear a statistic, and this, I'm going to apologize because I can't verify this. It's just something that someone told me about 5 years ago, so it might be wrong. But I did hear that Disney employs more mathematicians than it does any other sort of graduate, because
really, that I didn't know.
Or maybe it was Pixar. I've got this.
That is Disney now. So depending on when you read it,
which is the same. But just this idea that there's so much, in computer modeling, but also in, I don't know, modeling who's using the rides at Disney World or whatever. You know what I mean? There's just so much maths behind everything that they do that's actually
everything. One of our PhD students finished our program, got his PhD, and went to work for the Milwaukee Brewers, which is a baseball team here in Wisconsin, a professional baseball team. So even the sports teams now. Admittedly, I was excited because I thought he was going to be analyzing the players and their performance and all this stuff. And in fact, he was analyzing how much money fans spent as they walked through the various parts of the stadium and had the opportunity to buy different kinds of popcorn and stuff like this. So there's lots of analytics that don't have to do with what happens on the field, but so still,
he was thinking, if we increase the salt this much in the popcorn, therefore we can increase drink sales by this much, is very much like
I'm sure he wasn't allowed to tell me exactly what he was studying, but that could well have been it.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to start drawing tonight's event to a close. I've been having a great time chatting with Jordan, but I probably should let you go and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
I'll turn off my share so I can sort of say bye to everybody properly and they can see my whole face. So thanks so much, everybody who came. This was a super interesting discussion.
Just before we go, Jordan, if people want to find out more about you, you've got a website or a Twitter or anything that people can find out more?
I have both. You can go to jordanellenberg.com, and that's my website with information about the book, or you can go to my Twitter handle is JS Ellenberg. So my first two initials, JS, and then my last name, and that is where you can find me on Twitter, where I spend too much time every day.
And I'd also recommend Jordan's talk about his previous book, which you can also find on the Royal Institution YouTube channel, youtube.com/the Royal Institution. And there's loads of other great talks on there while you're sticking around. So that's it from me. And I better let you all get on with the rest of your evenings or days. But thank you so much for joining us, and thanks again to Jordan for a fantastic talk. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.